Thanks, Ren. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for your attention this afternoon. We're an ASX, Australian Stock Exchange listed security, so please do refer to our filings on our company website and the ASX platform for information about the company. We are, as I mentioned, listed on the Australian Exchange. We do not have any securities trading here in the US, but we are developing a very exciting new technology, a second-generation approach to the manufacture of MSCs, which we call Cymerus. It's a platform technology that, as Ren explained, harnesses the unlimited expansion potential of iPSCs. It's a patented process. The technology originated from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, who of course need no introduction to an audience like this, as one of the founding institutions of regenerative medicine and stem cell technology. We have a very clear focus on a business strategy that involves licensing and partnering our technology, and a board and a management team that has global experience. Fidelity International is our major shareholder with just a shade under 10%, followed by Fujifilm. Share price yesterday took a little dip on some news that I'll talk more about in a moment, but at the moment our market cap is around 110 or so million US, and up until yesterday we had a nice share price growth, particularly compared to the overall index over the past few months. What is our technology? Well, very simply, it uses iPSCs as the source material for deriving the finished product, which is, of course, the mesenchymal stem cell. So instead of relying on tissue donations, such as bone marrow or adipose tissue, we use the iPSC starting material to ensure that we have a consistent, robust, and reproducible finished product. It involves patents that were filed and in many cases granted now from the University of Wisconsin, and we have that technology under license. Essentially, this provides a scalable and consistent manufacturing solution to the challenge that we face in manufacturing these very difficult to make products, such as cell therapy products, and MSCs are no exception to that. Ultimately, this could lead to a more effective product and certainly will lead to a more consistent product. We recently completed results in a phase 1/2 clinical study in acute steroid-resistant graft versus host disease, and the results were better than we might have expected. Clearly, in a phase 1/2, safety was the primary endpoint, and we saw no safety markers or signals at all, so the product appeared to be very safe and well tolerated. But most excitingly, we saw an outstanding response in these very, very difficult to treat patients. Bear in mind that patients who have failed steroids, the standard of care for GVHD, are basically on a very slippery downhill slope, and the outlook for those patients clinically is very grim, with life expectancies within about 2 years of less than 10 to 20%, depending on the study centre. So these patients essentially are in last chance saloon when it comes to therapeutic options. Our data, and this is the pooled 100-day data for these patients, a complete response, that is a complete resolution of symptoms, symptom-free, in more than half of the patients, 8 out of 15. We saw an overall response, that's at least an improvement of 1 GVHD grade in 87% of the patients, and at 100 days, nearly all of the patients still alive. We had one patient die of pneumonia during the evaluation period, which is not an unusual circumstance in patients who are in acute care, and another patient who withdrew from the study after they'd received treatment, so unable to follow up that patient. But as you can see there on the slide, the individual patient data is compelling in this study. Most importantly, this data was achieved with 2 doses of product, 1 million cells per kilo, 7 days apart. And if you look at some of the other data for GVHD studies with MSCs, the dosing frequency and in some cases the number of cells is much, much higher. So in this case, say compared to some of the other studies, we're at about 1/4 of the dose. So from a cost of goods perspective, cost per treatment perspective, this is a considerable breakthrough. Looking now at our platform, I mentioned before that we had some news yesterday which was certainly not welcomed by the market. We have a partnership with Fujifilm for graft versus host disease. That partnership is in the form of a license option agreement, which was to have been exercised this week. Unfortunately, Fujifilm required a little more time, and we required an extension to allow that time to complete that transaction. It's simply a matter of time rather than any untoward information about the product, the IP, the technology, or anything else. So we obviously felt that that was an uncomfortable situation, but it would be inappropriate for us certainly to abandon that relationship at this stage, especially given how much work we've put in to it over the past couple of years. So we hope to bring to the market news in the coming months that that partnership has completed, and we enter into a license agreement with Fuji, which of course, as you would expect, involves substantial milestone and upfront payments, $3 million cash upfront, and a double-digit royalty as the product is rolled out globally by Fujifilm and their affiliates. In other areas, we have a planned osteoarthritis trial commencing or expected to commence this year. This will be one of the largest MSC trials undertaken, 450 patients funded by taxpayers' money in Australia by the NHMRC, the Aussie equivalent of the NIH. We also plan to commence a trial in critical limb ischemia. These are both phase 2 trials later this year, in addition to the planned phase 2 trial in GVHD, which we hope will be on track as Fujifilm exercise their option. In preclinical studies, on the right-hand side there of the slide, you can see that we have data in a range of preclinical models, and I particularly draw your attention to some very good data in asthma models, which has been published now, and some extremely exciting data in heart attack models. So all of this technology data substantiates and validates the platform, at least at a preclinical level, as being able to manufacture MSCs that are highly potent and highly effective. Of course, that's trumped ultimately by that clinical data that I mentioned before in GVHD, where we saw very, very good data. So the process, frankly, whilst of course we can say that it's a very, very effective process for manufacturing iPSCs through a completely new pathway, it also produces cells that are very, very effective. So finally, just a quick summary of the investment opportunity in Cynata. We have a next generation, the iPhone 11, if you like, of scalable technologies for manufacturing commercial quantities of MSCs consistently and reproducibly. No reliance upon multiple donors, no reliance on massive expansion of the MSCs themselves in culture, which has clearly been shown in the literature to lead to situations like replicative senescence, where the potency of those cells deteriorates as they are expanded. Basically, they run out of puff, and this is, as I said, well described in the literature. All endpoints of our phase 1 clinical trial in steroid-resistant acute GVHD were met, no adverse safety events, and highly encouraging efficacy, as well as, of course, I mentioned the data that demonstrated that 2 doses of our product are sufficient to achieve that clinical outcome. Endorsement by Big Pharma, our license option agreement with Fujifilm, which we hope will mature in the coming months, as we had hoped it would have this week in the exercise of that option, so that's still to come. Value inflection points, clearly we've demonstrated success in clinical trial in humans, and that supports our business development strategy for identifying and securing partners in other therapeutic areas. And we have informed the market that there are ongoing and active discussions with a number of parties in relation to that. So we look forward to bringing the market news not only on closing our deal with Fujifilm soon, but also further deals down the track, as well as progressing our clinical program into those areas of CLI and osteoarthritis, as I mentioned before. Over to you, Ren.
Great. So maybe we can dig into GVHD to begin with. It seems to be becoming a more crowded space. We just had Mesoblast present right before you with GVHD data. So I'd love to get your thoughts on not just your data so far, but really how it fits in, or how you see it fit in with the landscape, and over the current standard of care, and what the competitive advantages are.
Well, I think there are several elements to that. Obviously, as new therapies or therapeutic paradigms emerge for diseases that previously had been medical challenges, GVHD that fails to respond to corticosteroids, of course, is one such area. So that's an important point. The advent of new technologies enable investigations that ultimately will lead to new effective therapies. Also, of course, in the industry, we're seeing more and more segmentation, more and more interest in niches of niches so that manufacturers can own that particular application. And then in the case also, I guess, of GVHD, these patients, when they fail corticosteroids, really have no other recourse. There's no alternative for them. And ultimately, the outcome is, as I mentioned before, very, very grim. So I think, you know, that's our read on it. And of course, specifically as far as MSCs and GVHD are concerned, GVHD is an immune-mediated disease, and one of the most well-identified mechanisms of action, which still remain a little bit, you know, out there, of MSCs is their immunomodulatory effect. And of course, that is directly relevant to essentially calming down the immune system in these patients with an acute crisis of GVHD. So it can rescue them. The MSC therapy appears to rescue these patients from that crisis, allowing them to be more effectively managed with other available treatments.
So let's switch gears and talk about the elephant in the room, Fujifilm. The data is really, really compelling. They've been able to take a look at it, but clearly, you know, investors in the market, sort of the first reaction is to hit the sell button, without really, you know, really understanding what's happening. So can you help us really try to understand a little bit of what Fuji might be going through? Is it just reams and reams of data that they have to go through, or are there other things that are happening at their organization that led to this? And I think more importantly, what is their commitment to the space? You know, and in your opinion, to you.
Well, I think their commitment to the space is probably best answered by Fujifilm themselves, but clearly the activities of Fuji do speak to that question, and that is those activities include very recently, just last week, the acquisition of Biogen's manufacturing facility in Scandinavia, a $900-ish million transaction. So they're very, very active in building out their resource capability, not only in manufacturing but also in technology, in the regenerative medicine space. Now, the Biogen facility is a more broad-based biological manufacturing plant, but their build-out in Madison, Wisconsin, on their CDI facility, Cellular Dynamics, one of the early companies in the iPSC space, which Fujifilm now own, that investment there, which they announced, I think, about a few months back, is very, very clearly directed towards manufacturing products like ours. As to the status of Fuji as the elephant in the room, yes, they're not on our Christmas card list anymore for the moment, given the frustration we felt with the events over the past few days. But clearly they remain very, very committed to this product, to Cynata, and to the relationship. They have a very active media campaign as recently as a couple of months ago, defining the pathway for CUIP-001, the GVHD product. So clearly they remain on board. They're not reviewing reams of data and information from the clinical study or anything else. That's all been done over the past 2 years since we entered into the option agreement. Most recently, of course, the clinical study report was the final piece of that, and that's all been completed. It's just, it needs more time to close, quite simply. That's, you know, there's some fine detail. We have to bring the license agreement up to a contemporary standard. That was agreed about 2 years ago, and obviously things have moved forward. The patent estate has evolved, and other elements need to be revised in the agreement. So there's a bit of legal work to go on, and I suppose their legal department has had a pretty busy schedule with the closing of the Biogen deal that I just mentioned before. So, and you know, I think all of us who have dealt with companies in Asia and Japan specifically, you know, things are done differently. They take longer many times, and it's not always the clearest path that we might expect. But I remain confident that within the next few months we'll be able to close this transaction and bring the market the good news that they certainly deserve and expect.
Terrific. Good luck with that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ren.